Juniper Books presents The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD from his notes recorded at the time. Chapter 6
28th of February 2026. I spent the following 2 days alone in a state of anticipation, and I didn't sleep well. Mostly, I pondered on ways of how to extract myself from this situation, but everything I came up with involved leaving the apartment for good and basically meant going on the run, which was unacceptable. Therefore, that is why I found myself coming to terms with the arrangement. I had no wish to trust him, and no reason to, but if he was as powerful as he had indicated, then running away wouldn't have been the answer anyway. It seemed that I was caught. Of course, I could have sent myself to a time where he could not find me, but that did not appeal at all. What would I do in the past? Become a beggar? Live on the streets? Perform tricks for my next meal before I became crashing down with some unable to cure illness or ailment? No. Better to do what he wants, whatever that is, and get him off my back. And if he tricks me and wants to exploit more of what I can do, then that will be the time to take more drastic action. After all, I convinced myself, I'm the one with the power. I'm the one who holds all the cards. If he wants to play clean, then I'll behave cleanly. If he wants to play dirty, then I'll give him dirty. I was eating lunch when my bell rang, and I saw his long chiselled beard face on my door camera. Wordlessly I pushed the button and let him in, and then left my door ajar and continued eating. When he entered, I looked up silently, and I will admit, not without a little apprehension. "Good morning, John." To this greeting I only nodded and ate the last morsel of my cheese sandwich. Although I didn't invite him to sit, he did anyway, and looked at me intently through his monocle. He put his attaché case on the floor and waited for me to speak. "All right, you have your deal. I'll do it." "That's splendid. A wise decision, if I may say so. You didn't give me much of a choice, did you?" "C'est la vie. So let's get down to business. But you may as well understand this from the beginning that I'm not going to reveal the nature of why I want to go where I want to go. Your involvement will be limited to a time and a place. We will travel to a destination. You will do what you are required to do, and you will wait and then collect me. Under no circumstances whatsoever will I reveal the nature of my business to you. Is this fully understood?" "Yeah, I understand. What are you going to do, kill someone?" "Did you not hear what I said?" "Okay. So give me some details, place and time." "No, that's not going the way this works. The way it will work is that I will collect you, and we will drive to a destination known only to me and my driver. You will not engage in conversation with him at all, is that clear? And he most definitely has orders not to talk to you. Upon our arrival, we will take a short walk to the final area, where you will be required to do the thing for which I am paying you £1 million. You will then wait exactly 1 hour before you collect me. Is there anything you do not understand?" No, it's as clear as mud." He stood and picked up his attaché case. "Then I will collect you tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Until then." I watched him get into the same car, and then I sat on the end of my bed, annoyed, confused, and angry as a whole load of possible scenarios rushed through my mind. Surely if he was on the level, we wouldn't be taking all these secret precautions, would we? What did he intend to do? kill someone? With no information at all to go on, even my brain came to a standstill, which I found distinctly uncomfortable, like trying to understand infinity, a problem our brains are not designed to solve. How could I solve a problem without any data? The only positive thing I did that day was to check to see what the weather was going to be like tomorrow. Not that I suspected it was going to make any difference at all. Unless we went on a jet to some other country, I didn't know. 1st of March, 2026. I slept poorly, waking up several times, and as the sun rose, my anticipation increased, to the point where all I wanted was coffee, and true to his word, Maximilian arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. And as he handed over a cheque for £500,000, I stared at it. Who the hell writes cheques anymore? I could not but suspect that the man held himself a little differently, and even spoke in a slightly different way. The closest I surmised was that I gained an impression that he was like a kid who was going on holiday. However, he made it clear that there was to be no general conversation in the car, and the few times I glanced at him, he appeared to be chewing his lip. I could see little, though, through the tinted windows, but I recognised that we were travelling west, and if I am honest, it was the worst car journey I had ever undertaken, and caused my already high anticipation to increase even more than it was when I entered his Bentley. Can I ask how long this journey is going to take? We will get there when we get there. About an hour. Well, that was something. We entered the suburbs of West London, avoiding the main roads, and soon I saw fields and forests and noticed that we were passing several medium-sized villages. And as we were passing one of these, we slowed, and I felt the mood in the car change. The driver then pulled over and cut the engine. Maximilian looked at me. We have a 10-minute walk. We had stopped in a narrow road underneath a number of low-hanging trees, and his luxury car looked completely out of place. With his walking stick, Maximilian pointed to a church spire nestling beyond a wood a little way off. There, we can take this path. The day was clear and bright, and the path he indicated took us through that small wood, a field, and over 2 stiles, and all this was conducted in silence, even though we were walking beside each other. The church appeared suddenly, and he stopped for a moment, long enough for me to see that it was abandoned. Its windows were covered with boarding, and the graveyard was overgrown and unkept. As we walked nearer, I saw beyond the covered porch the church's front door was secured with 2 locks. We came to a halt, and I heard Maximilian take a few deep breaths. "All right, time to earn your money, John." I knew there was no point in asking any questions about what he intended to do, so all I asked was the time, day, month, and year. And so finally, he gave me a part of the puzzle. 16th of October, 1976, 2 in the afternoon will do. I repeated it, so to make sure, and he nodded. Good. All right. You'll wait for me on these seats then. What time do you have? 11:25. I suppose the church is occupied in 1976. It will be. Now let's move round the corner and make that our drop-off and pick-up point. So we aren't seen. You've given this a lot of thought. As I was becoming used to not receiving an answer, I followed him and we found ourselves standing in the overgrown graveyard. It was a windless day, bright and sunny, as I previously mentioned, and not for the first time did I harbour considerable feelings about what Maximilian was going to it do was inherently wrong and probably illegal, but there was no getting out of it now. "In your own time," he said. He watched with intense interest as I patted the dark marks with my left forefinger, and then I took his arm. His expression was grave as I touched the final one, and after a series of multiple brief flashes, we were there, and I released him immediately and tapped the return mark so quickly that I had no time at all to view 1976. I reappeared back in 2026, probably less than a couple of seconds after I had disappeared. I walked back to the covered porch and sat on one of the long wooden seats, and everything was silent except for the wildlife. Out of interest, I used my phone to see where I was, and the map showed I was at the Church of St. Peter on the outskirts of a small village between Reading and Maidenhead. With nothing else to do, I inspected the check again, and then spent the rest of my time reading a thesis on a new form of calculus until my phone bleeped, telling me 55 minutes had passed. I stood close by the same spot, and exactly after 1 hour had passed, I vanished and reappeared on the 16th of October 1976 again to see Maximilian waiting a metre away, but hardly in the same temperament as when he left, as he was holding a cream-coloured handkerchief to his face. His head bent downwards as his shoulders jerked. He jumped when I took his arm, and when he looked at me, his eyes were astonishingly wet with tears. Silently, I returned us to our normal time and then released him. We stood apart in silence, but the man could not stop weeping or control himself, and I didn't know if I ought to say anything or just keep quiet. Clearly he had seen something or experienced something of a personal nature, and although I didn't know him at all well, I figured it was not my place to inquire what was happening to him. All the same, it was embarrassing to witness this once stoic man weeping like a child, and it took a few minutes for him to recover enough for him to silently indicate that it was time to return to the car. All the same, I was still surprised that 30 miles into the journey back to my apartment, he still hadn't recovered sufficiently to speak in his normal voice. Yet I gained the impression that he was grateful that I didn't ask him any questions. Traffic in London was slow, and that made my awkward situation worse. But when the driver came finally to a halt outside my apartment, Maximilian reached inside an inside pocket and gave me another envelope. And I swear there was more humility in that gesture than I had ever seen in any other man. Whatever had happened in that graveyard certainly brought him to his knees. Before I left the car, he spoke as he touched my arm. "Thank you." I nodded gamefully, and away he went. Inside the envelope was the second cheque, and I celebrated by ordering a takeaway and chose a film. Yet my heart really wasn't in it, because buzzing about in the back of my brain was the notion of how easy it could be to make a great deal of money. I felt as if somebody had lit the blue touch paper on a fantastic money-making firework. That night's sleep was not as restful either, and because I slept lightly, the dreams came thick and fast, and some were as lurid and as colourful as I never want to experience again. That one night taught me how convoluted the human mind could be once released from consciousness. But really, why was I so surprised that my inner thoughts were so messed up? Look at what I was doing. 2nd of March, 2026. I finally woke for the last time, convinced that I had a mission for the day. And to that end, after I sat in my new electric car, I programmed it for St John's Church, edged it silently from the building's underground parking, and took off westward, following the GPS woman's voice. Besides taking me a slightly different way, and a way that was quicker, I eventually pulled alongside the church, and the area around it was just as sunny and just as quiet and just as devoid of people as yesterday. During the journey I had pondered what I was actually going to do, either secrete myself somewhere and return to the date Maximilian gave me to observe only, or just take a look around. Given that the moment this travelling lark was all experimental, I decided on the latter. The graveyard itself was a typical size for a small country church. Surrounded by thick stone walls, they enclosed mature elms and oaks and the normal engraved headstones and crosses carved from limestone. Most of them were in neat rows, some with flowers in pots, but mostly looked as if they hadn't received any love or attention for a considerable time. But what immediately took my eye was a marble monument that stood a great deal taller than any other. I am nearly 2 meters in height, but this tombstone was a meter higher. Somehow, just through sheer intuition, I knew this had to be the reason Maximilian had needed to be here. And I was correct when I read a large brass plaque telling the visitor that the body of Hugo Nibley Dawson laid within, and that he left the earth on the 1st of October 1976, leaving behind a devoted wife Mary and a son, Maximilian. My imagination conjured the scene then. This man, this father, had died when his son Maximilian had been a child. What didn't make sense was that if Maximilian had wanted to see his father, why go to his funeral? Then the penny dropped. It was not his father he had wanted to see. It was his mother, who most likely was dead in my normal time. And given how emotional he had been after arriving back, that made far more sense. But however, there was no more information to be had. No more information, just a great deal of speculation as I remembered again the blue touch paper being lit on a fantastic money-making firework. Yes, it was one thing to punish a person, to scare the living daylights out of them, but it was certainly another to send a person back to, say, meet and speak with a deceased relative. Just how much would people pay to have that experience? £1 million in Maximilian's case. If I were able to get the right people, and by that I mean those with deep pockets, executing that idea would be safer than piddling about with the national lottery. To write that I was thoughtful as I returned walking slowly back to the car was an understatement, and this sense of wonderment hadn't left me by the time I had driven back. Still slightly dazed with my new ideas, I locked my new purchase in the garage and took the lift to my floor. As I ate yet another takeaway, important thoughts came to me. The first and major one concerned secrecy. I was fairly certain that Jennifer Martin wasn't going to say anything, most probably out of fear. However, Maximilian was a different matter, and the question of that £1 million floated before me. Was that payment for what I had done for him, or was the sum given to me to prevent me from mentioning what I had done? Unable to process this, I remembered his fancy card and retrieved it from my wallet. Unfortunately, there was no number, just frustratingly his first name and an email address, but it was something. Therefore, it took me less than a minute to compose a few words asking him to get in contact again, and that was all I could think of doing that day. However, while I was at the computer, I read a number of emails from my family, and from the tone of each, it seemed as if I had become the black sheep. Now that my winnings had become an open secret, each of them desired a piece of the pie, or at least my two sisters did. I gained the impression that my parents were still too annoyed to ask me for anything. Maggie and Zoe wanted to visit, and they hinted that they would bring Benny. I wrote back telling them yes. So an arrangement was made for them to stay over the next weekend, with Sam joining Maggie on the Sunday. After that had been settled, I fell into a kind of speculation, wondering how I was able to be one sort of person to a multi-millionaire, undergoing secret assassinations in time, and then soon after play host to my two sisters who had no idea at all what true power I wielded. 3rd of March 2026. I was soon to discover the strength of this power on the following day, for in the morning, in response to my email, my mobile rang, and Maximilian's clipped tones were immediately obvious. Could I speak to him on an urgent matter? He told me he was busy at the present time, but I persisted, and he relented. However, after a short silence, he offered me the only time that he had available, which unhappily coincided with the arrival of Maggie and Zoe. Of course I agreed, and then garnered my strength for putting off my sisters, and they were not pleased, of course. 8th of March 2026. On Saturday at 2 p.m, I stood waiting outside the entrance to London Zoo under my umbrella, as it had been raining since first light, and exactly at 2 o'clock, the man with the large head and wearing a black trench coat approached me and told me that Mr. Nibley Dawson was waiting in his car. Only when he spoke did I fully realise that he had to been the chauffeur. Again, something about the large size of his head, I think. We didn't have far to walk, and the chauffeur opened the door for me, and I climbed in. Maximilian was reading the newspaper, and he placed that aside and spoke first. "John, good to see you. And straight away I want to apologise for the way I conducted myself when I arrived back." "I really don't think you have any need to, Maximilian. Whatever it was, it obviously affected you greatly. I will be honest, I was seeing and even exchanging a few words with my deceased mother. The effect on me, to my surprise, I was unable to control. I loved her as much as a son could, and her sudden death precipitated me into a time of depression. To speak with her before her illness, before she was ravaged by it, was unforgettable and life-changing. I cannot tell you how grateful I am." "You have shown your gratitude, Maximilian." That money was meaningless when compared to the experience you allowed me to have. I will, therefore, be grateful and eternally grateful. I'm glad I could help. May I ask what happened to your mother?" "An inexplicable stroke. She was hospitalised immediately, but there was nothing they could do, and she died less than a day later. But I was with her at the end." "So was part of going back to speak with her about warning her?" There occurred a sudden and powerful silence between us, as Maximilian stared seemingly into empty space before he slowly turned his head and stared at me as if I was some alien from another planet. "What did you say?" Did you speak about warning her? I'm thinking by your expression that didn't occur to you." "No," he breathed. "No, it did not. Why didn't I think of that? Could it be that I had the means to save her? Bloody Jesus Christ!" He reached into his pocket and took out his cigarette case and lit a thin roll-up. His eyes fixed on nothing. I felt uncomfortable, not knowing what to say, but there was a whole lot of things happening in my head, racing thoughts that sooner occurred to Maximilian too. I am a practical man, John. I make practical decisions based upon evidence I can see and touch. I have sometimes been labelled narrow-minded, intolerant and conservative, and when I hear such words I am proud. I do exist in a practical realm with normally no use for hypotheses and assumptions. Of course, Jennifer's condition and story changed all that, but still, even having undergone what you offered and delivered, the notion that I could possibly actually change my mother's destiny never once occurred to me. Until now. I tell you, John, I feel like a man who has lived his entire life in a box, and you have just opened the lid to reveal a greater reality. I thought it was a possibility. I've no idea if it would work. Changing the past, if anybody did, then how would that change us? How indeed. You'll have dinner with me this evening. You must. There are things to discuss. He reached forward and pressed a button. Charles, get on to my 6 o'clock and reschedule. Yes, sir, came a deep voice through the speaker. Maximilian was obviously speaking to his chauffeur as I saw that large head turn quickly. I have a small London flat, John, locally. You don't mind? You have time? You're sure. I've nothing else on. Maximilian's small London flat, of course, turned out to be anything but tiny. However, it did lack the sophistication of mine, being that the building in the heart of Mayfair was built in the 1930s, and most of the decor and even the furniture remained in the style of that year. However, for all that, there was a sense of comfortableness about it that mine did not possess. I was convinced of this because Art Deco pervaded throughout and could be seen on basically everything except for the few modern necessities such as an indecently huge TV which took up almost one entire wall of the living room, and quite frankly, even to me who was in favour of big screen technology, it looked appallingly out of place. As we were on the 10th floor, the views overlooking West London were exceptional. While Maximilian altered his diary in another room, he left me alone to admire and cogitate in silence. It was the sound of his front door opening that drew my attention, and not long after a distinguished middle-aged man entered. He was immaculately attired in a grey suit, which was, incidentally, the same colour as his hair. By the way he moved, and by the size of his head, I recognised him to be Maximilian's chauffeur before he even spoke. Good afternoon, sir. Hello. If you would permit me, sir, I am Charles, Dr. Nibley Dawson's manservant and chauffeur. Oh, hello, I'm John. Of course, sir. If you will forgive me, sir. He disappeared through another door, I presume the kitchen, and I gave some thought as to why I was surprised that Maximilian had a chauffeur working in his flat. Of course, any person, male or female, who could throw away £1 million as if they were buying a newspaper would have someone to manage their daily affairs at home. But overall it did make me wonder how expensive and large was Maximilian's main home, wherever that was. And what's with being a doctor? Maximilian returned, followed by Charles, carrying a tray of coffee, and I was officially introduced to him. I was asked if lamb was to my liking, and upon my affirmative answer, he left, leaving us alone. Sorry, when he came in, he mentioned Dr. Nibley Dawson. Did he mean you? Are you a doctor? I have a doctorate in engineering, nothing special. It was a diploma that my family expected me to get, but I never use it. Actually, I think Charles is the only person who uses the term. As you may find out, Charles is a snob, and he likes to bandy about that he works for a doctor. Has he been with you a long time? Decades. He was first employed by my father. He works here only in London. In fact, I can only remember 2 times that he went to Upperwood to assist with the function. Is that your home in the country? Basically, yes. My sister runs the place now. So what do you think of my little pied-à-terre? I like it. It's homely. It makes my flat look like a showroom for some wannabe pop star with too much money. I have to say that the furnishings are not at their prime, being close to 100 years old, but Charles would have a fit if I began throwing anything out. It's important to keep the paid help happy. He winked at me as he said that, and I smiled as I reached for my coffee. And in doing so, my sleeve exposed the markings on the back of my hand, and Maximilian drew my attention to them, asking if he could observe them more closely. To this I had no objection, and after he found a magnifying glass from a drawer in the writing desk, I held out my hand. Incredible. They really are part of your skin, like an actual tattoo, and you have no idea what they mean. It hardly took any time at all before our conversation fell into uncharted territory. All I know is what I was shown and what I have to do. Travel back and return. By themselves, I don't have a clue as to what they mean, or why some of them are like this one, and some are like this one. I've looked online, and in as many mathematical printed works as I own, and I have been unable to find any reference to them, and as to how they work, all of it's just all a complete mystery. I wonder... Yes? Maximilian took a mouthful of his coffee and rolled another cigarette and lit it before he spoke. Well, it just occurred to me, if we were shown a modern car to, say, a man from the Tudor era, what would he make of it? We could show that the petrol tank being filled, and then we might show the car travelling at speed. But I wonder if you could make the connection between the two. He might just see 2 processes and he wouldn't guess at all that they are connected. And that something really sophisticated has to happen to explain both things. Do you think something like that is happening here? We have an input, the markings, and we have an output, travelling in time. We just don't know how the bloody middle bit works, or why this ability was given to me. Quite. That is a further challenge to understand. At that point, Charles entered again, carrying a tray on which were biscuits, and he placed them on the highly polished table in front of us. I saw Maximilian offer me a wink. Charles, a question for you. Sir? If you could go back in time, where would you go and what would you do? To his credit, the manservant appeared to think for a second or two about this obviously insane question. I'm afraid I have to say, sir, that I would not undertake any such journey. Really? Nowhere at all? None that immediately springs to mind, sir. Will that be all? Yes, thank you, Charles. Dinner will be at 5, sir. I've taken the liberty of opening a 208 Roberto di Dino. Very good, sir. Charles then left us, and Maximilian smiled before he took another long drag of his cigarette. It was interesting, although I had an idea he'd say that. Was there a point? I believe so. I believe my manservant is of a class of people who are content with their lot. These are the people who do the lottery, and when they win any substantial amount of money, go to pieces. They lose their jobs, their wives, their husbands and friends, all the time convincing themselves that they are content and happy. There's no adventurous soul within at all. You sound as if you're describing me and my life exactly. To be honest, I can't think of anything more exciting and comforting than being alone with an educating book on mathematics. Really? And you are the person who were chosen by goodness knows what to do something no other human being can do? I don't know that, Maximilian. I could be one out of 100, perhaps thousands, who have been gifted with these marks. Yes, I can see that. But however, let me return to the petrol analogy. Those marks especially. Now you can put 5-star in the car or unleaded, but it's all petrol, isn't it? Yes. So by reason alone, those marks have to perform the same function on whomever they are bestowed, if they are. Which means that surely some woman in India, or some man in America, or some child in China would have searched for them as well, and left an electronic footprint. But you say you have found no trace of them online? True. No trace whatsoever. So we might conclude that it's a possibility that you are the only person to whom this has happened. Well, when it first happened, when I woke up, I thought the same, but I hoped I was wrong. Those early experiences really freaked me out. But then I thought, I'm not special. I can't be the only one that this has happened to. And I kind of left it like that. Until a minute ago. I suppose you thought through the full ramifications of the amount of power you have. Bloody hell, John. You can do anything you like. Go back and kill Hitler and Stalin. Prevent World War I. Validate if Jesus existed. Watch Charles I's execution. Pose for Leonardo da Vinci. Hell, you have the power, the ability to change European history. No, world history. Hold on, Maximilian. I've thought of all this already, and most of that is impractical. I barely speak decent English, let alone 15th century Italian. And the clothes and the money, not to mention even attempting to pass being a man of that age without getting rumbled. It's only possible if I don't care about what I look and sound like. And me going back and shoving an iPad under Leonardo's nose won't do history any good, will it? God, I feel as if we are in fantasy land just thinking about it. No, you've taken me too literally, John. Those things just came off the top of my head. I mean, look what you've done for me, and maybe what you could do for others. You mean charge them? Is one way to make a living. But I don't need to make a living. But do you feel the need to help people? Not really. Let's face it, Maximilian, I only helped you because I thought I was going to be blackmailed. Okay, I see that. So, what do you intend to do with this incredible gift? This fantastic power? Honestly, I haven't really given it that much thought. Not seriously, anyway. You plan to do nothing. Well, now that makes me sound selfish. Listen, if I could pass this on to you, then I would. Straight away. You can have it. I've got enough money to last me a lifetime. I can settle back and study whatever and whenever I like. I can be my own person. I am my own person now that I've got my family off my back. Your parents are alive, of course. All too very much alive. They are doctors, and I am sure that I'm the family disappointment, even though I've achieved so much. I believe I understand you, John. My family has a rich history of achievers, and for a long time I was not really considered Nibley Dawson material. What changed? My sister got pregnant outside of marriage. Not the done thing, old boy. Well, perhaps it is the done thing, as long as you're not caught. Difficult for a woman, then. Did she have the baby? Oh, yes, young Maud. God, what a name to give to a girl. Lives with her mother at home. The family seat. Just so. We settled into this interesting conversation comparing our histories, and I have to say that I was glad, because I was not interested in exploring the other thing that was obviously on his mind. However, while eating the tastiest lamb cutlets I ever had in my life, Maximilian brought himself around again to that which I didn't wish to discuss. You said you have enough money, John, but I wonder, is that the truth? Because who knows what's going to happen in the future? Banks have been known to collapse. Political allegiances change sides. Even entire political structures have been known to crumble. The French Revolution, our own civil war, and there is some indication that we as a nation are not exactly stable at the moment. Look at the last few years and the political turmoil. One cannot deny it. And you think that having money in the bank is the answer? If the banks collapse, I won't be any better off, will I? That's true enough. However, like a phoenix, civilizations will rise from whatever ashes are left, and there is one currency that will always remain first and foremost. You're going to say gold, aren't you? I've heard of this. But honestly, where would I keep it? Storing it sounds very much like my old problem of charging myself enough. What am I thinking of? Going back to Shakespeare's day and asking that he accepts that I've been born in that time. What do? Get myself a safe and store gold coins in it? I'm not making myself clear, but you know what I mean. John, you slightly missed my point. Yes, you could do that with what you have, but do you want the hassle of opening it and exchanging some of it every time you want to buy a bottle of 1955 Chateau Cheval Blanc? Or in your case, a takeaway pizza? Of course not. But while I say yes, perhaps that's not such a bad idea, a more constructive way to negotiate your way around such trifles as our civilization collapsing is to, 1, become aware of what is to become, and I believe you are eminently suited to that, and secondly, make as much money as you possibly can and begin to live somewhere where you are not only safer, but have the potential to keep you fed and watered if such an emergency to take place. The future. I know I did my little experiments with the National Lottery, but to look even further? How can that be? To my mathematical mind, that feels impossible. Yet you did it twice. Yes, and it still disturbs me. Mathematically, it's just a big no-no. Yet you did it. I wish you wouldn't keep saying that. It feels as if I'm delving into magic, and that doesn't fit my idea of how the universe works at all. I just find all this extremely disturbing. I can just about handle the mad idea that the past exists concurrently with us, even if it's normally out of reach for most humans, but I can't get on board with the future so easily. Why? Because it means everything is fated to happen. I was fated to be here and enjoy your lamb chops and drink this red. I can't think about it, Maximilian. It depresses and it even frightens me. Then don't think about it, John. Think about the gratification your gift can bring to others, as you have done to me. I finished the last of my wine in one go and gently and thoughtfully replaced the glass back on the table. All this began out of fear that Jennifer was going to expose me, which led me doing what I did, which led me to you and what happened there, and now I am fighting against my own morals. How did I get here? In my own way, I was perfectly content with my few millions and my research and my days and nights alone. Are you telling me, Maximilian, that you know of, let's call them friends of yours, who would pay good money to go back somewhere? Let me just say that I know people who would give away their entire fortune to experience what I did. People I don't know from Adam. How could I keep the lid on that? You don't have very many wealthy friends, do you? I don't have any friends, let alone ones with that sort of money that you're talking about. Let me tell you something, John. The people that I know retain their money by becoming secretive. Secrecy is more than just not telling one woman about another. Nor is it about not telling lies. It's about power. Keeping your power and keeping your knowledge to yourself. If these gimmickly marks on your hand could be given to another, would you really? Or would you want to keep the power they have to yourself? Be honest with me now. Okay, I see what you mean, but the way I see it is that if I helped somebody, then how would I know that that somebody won't inadvertently tell a third party? And then what's to stop that third party acting in the same way as Jennifer? Because then I'd be back to where I was a week ago. If you trust me, John, I could show you a way through all that. And what would you get out of it? A percentage? No. Believe it or not, I'd get the pleasure of knowing that I helped somebody who was in the position I was a few days ago. It's the most expensive gift I could give to anybody. Maximilian refilled my glass, and Charles took our empty plates and provided fresh ones for Sweet, and I observed his composed and efficient manner as he worked. After he had returned to the kitchen, Maximilian took up his glass and smiled, to which I said, I wonder if he's got an old skeleton in his cupboard that needs fixing. John, I think you would have to try extremely hard to find a human being who would not like to return to some part of his or her life to either do it better or speak to somebody when they had the greatest influence over them. And let us not forget the intellectuals, the historians who would give their back teeth to actually witness events now lost or misunderstood. I mean, speaking for myself, what about saving the great library of Alexandria when it was at its most powerful? All that knowledge lost to history. You may be right. I think this wine's gone to my head. Okay, finish that, and I'll pour you into a taxi, and maybe you'll think about what we've been chatting about. It doesn't do any harm to think about things now, does it?
You have been listening to an audio production of The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD.